Hello and welcome to the Prepared Mind channel and the Prepared Mind Network. Everywhere we're at, we've got some quite amazing things that have developed in China, or rather Hong Kong. I think that's the crux of the matter, is Hong Kong wants to remain independent. But they were never independent. They were a British province, or colony, if you will, and that got handed back to China by arrangement years ago, and it was all known. There were no rash plans, no abandonment. It was supposed to be a smooth transition. Well, and that's just what we're looking at here with regard to China, to get some context, right? YouTube, get context on what's happening. It was supposed to be a smooth transition. Transition doesn't mean one day to the next. It's over 50 years. The transition is supposed to happen. A gradual acceptance by China of responsibility for Hong Kong. And a shall we say, blending of the two. You know, China wouldn't instantly acquire Hong Kong and demand that its westernized thinking disappear. Unfortunately, what has happened is there was an attempt by China, or rather by Hong Kong politicians who are considered by many to be puppets of the Chinese regime. Now, my thought is if they're being voted on by Hong Kongese and put into office, how can they be puppets? And if Hong Kong is really this active in wanting to have independent government, you know, independent politicians of China, that is, independent of, wouldn't you think that such a small body of people would be able to make their beliefs known? Now, in California and indeed the United States, one vote out of, say, 50 million people who choose to vote in a presidential election, my vote doesn't mean shit compared to, say, Hong Kong, where they only have 1 million voters. I would definitely like my vote over my life to have more value than 1 in 50 million. You know, 1 in 1 million, at least, you know, that's 50 times greater or more powerful in my direction of my own life. Still, in China, or rather Hong Kong, they feel their votes don't count. And that's what's led to this problem. This protester issue. Now, it's great from the perspective of an academic view or an interested person doing investigation for their own way of thinking. In other words, being a prepper. Looking at China and Hong Kong not as entertainment, but rather to teach us lessons about shit hitting the fan here in the United States. There comes a point when people lose their shit, and we're seeing that with Hong Kong. And there comes a point where people, once they've lost their shit, and said, you know, this is terrible, it's worthless, it is now time to protest and fight, etc., etc. And so we're seeing this continuing escalation. And I asked the question, I go, what's the point and purpose of protesting? China's not in there with troops. This is a couple weeks ago. China's not in there with tanks. Well, they've continued to protest because they're not happy with the situation. The economy's slowing down. There's problems socially. There's problems politically, right? And as a result, people are losing their shit. And they're protesting for what I consider to be very poor reasons. But to them, it's all the reason. And here we are. What happened this weekend in Hong Kong? People started protesting, you know, dramatically, big time. The real reason, in one article that was pointed to, why the university in Hong Kong that became like a siege fortress for students and protesters is because like 95% of all internet traffic going through Hong Kong goes through the servers and routing system through this college, this university. And the police want control of it, and the students and protesters have taken control of it. And that's where the fight really happened through the weekend and even up to where we're at now. And yes, the People's Liberation Army, they have troops there, you know, and most of the pictures I've seen, which are released, show them more civilian attired than in full military combat gear. And certainly no tanks yet, as of yet. But it is escalating. So this fight and demand for control of the university seems to be a desperation attempt on part of the protesters to be able to continue to speak freely to the world, even though they have their perspective and their side, right? They're imperfect humans, just like we are. They're going to put out a skewed version of events. They're going to probably lie and fabricate and make things seem bigger and crazier, right? Because they're going to want sympathy and support from others. And they've gotten it. The world is pissed off at China over Hong Kong. I've tried to maintain a more neutral perspective, thinking, well, yeah, the politicians, the police, and even the Chinese are a bunch of overbearing pricks. But these students have also convinced me that they're a bunch of whining, sniveling jackasses. That's my opinion. You probably have your own opinion. But when the students, you know, beat up and set an older man on fire, that basically did it for me. Right? When they protest and shut down business, then they're hurting regular people. You can't really hurt government. You can starve the government a little, but you can't hurt it. They're just, government you can't put your finger on. It's a building. You can burn a building down, the government still exists. You can shoot their computers up and smash them with hammers, but the government's still there. You can take out a politician or maybe an entire bureaucracy, but the government still exists and it's going to come back. It's like hitting a ghost with a stick. Stick, you know, goes through it. Ghost is still there. But unlike our normal ghost, the government, right, uses its ghostly powers to call police with real batons and real guns and real rubber bullets and real water cannons and real sound devices. And all of those things hurt to greater and lesser degrees, as in inflict pain, injury, and death. That's where government really has its power. It's martial power. It's iron fist that's usually kept under a velvet glove that it strokes it with and says, see, I'm protecting you. And you feel that soft velvet, right? But you know it. You can feel it there as it's stroking you, right? It's like, yeah, you know. You're going to tax me and tell me what a great job you're doing for me, but you fuck up and that fist is right there just pounding you. That's what's happened with Hong Kong. And the students, and I've got to give them kudos, have balls. They're standing up saying, no fucking way. They believe what they believe. Some of them are radicalized. Some of them are patriotic, and some are a little of both. They all believe what they believe, and they're all real live humans with real lives at risk. And for that part, you've got to really, you know, I respect the fact that they're engaged in a life and death struggle. On the side of the police and the military, do they really believe the government is right? Do police, sheriffs, state troopers, federal agents, military, do they believe what they're doing is right when they battle their own people? Or are they there for a paycheck? Or are they violent thugs who are there for a paycheck, and they're going to use that as an option or opportunity to beat the living fuck out of people? Ask yourself that if you're either a policeman or law enforcement agent of any sort or military. Are you there just to kill and maim? Are you there for a paycheck, or are you there because you believe in what you're doing? These are questions that we as preppers need to ask ourselves and ask about the people we see around us. And the reason is I'm going to get to the next phase of this discussion. I've got another article here. The police storm Absolutely storm the campus. Go ahead and take a look at the articles. There's updates on these articles, and it's going to probably get worse before it gets any better, unless the students just give. But there's scenes where things are on fire. Let me tell you what the students are doing. So the police have stormed the campus. The students have locked themselves inside buildings, tall buildings, and they've got homemade catapults. They're throwing desks and any heavy objects they can down out of the buildings in an attempt to keep the police away. They're also throwing Molotov cocktails. They're also shooting bows and arrows. And police have been hurt. They've closed roadways because they've thrown shit in the road, and regular people have gotten out of their vehicles, tried moving objects out of the way so they can continue to travel, and they've been injured and hospitalized because more stuff is thrown down on top of them. So the thing I have to point out here is, as a prepper, when shit goes bad, we have to understand the best and safest place to be is bunkered in at home or bunkered out at your location. Either way, you're in a bunker. You're not driving down the streets, taking a look at everyone, waving like it's a fucking parade, or you're inside a movie watching, right? No. People are idiots. People are dangerous. And this is a great example. This Hong Kong thing is a superb shit it's the fan example. It started basically over nothing. It's fueled by desperation and anger and fear. Sides clash. The government's involved. It wants its control and power back. So it uses more force. And the police they're not victims to bows and arrows and Molotov cocktails. They're shooting real bullets now. Essentially, this is a war. It's a small, well, it's not a war. Let's call it a battle. The battle of the campus, right? It's a battle at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. But students, protesters, ransacked sporting goods stores to get the weapons and defensive stuff they have. Football helmets, hockey helmets, ice skating helmets, whatever helmets they could get, I bet they're wearing. Shoulder pads, protective sleeves, whatever they can get to protect themselves, I'm sure they stole that stuff. This is what happens when shit hits the fan. The fucking city's on fire. You've got conflict between groups. Groups either believe that they're right or they want to hurt other people. And this is not, the hurting other people isn't about my belief that that's what police want. Some do, because they told me. I like beating the shit out of people, and this is my excuse. Yeah, that's great, Mac. You fuck, is what I'm thinking. Good seeing you. Thanks for the info and letting me know. There's a lot of cops out there that are just good guys. There's a lot of them out there that are there for the paycheck and they'll do whatever they're told to do. But back to the people who just want to beat the shit out of people. That's not exclusive or limited to just police. It's everywhere. There are people just waiting for the opportunity to hurt others because they're sadistic, because they're angry. You can tell I'm not an angry person. I want to stay away from these idiots. But yeah, regular old people are in the same boat, right? They're just not cops. They're just not government officials. They're just not military. And your attitude does change. And this is something that I think is very important. After you've been knocked out, knocked down, have some broken ribs, ripped muscle groups, hit in the stomach, in the back, cold-cocked, blindsided. After you get hurt a bit, you start to realize this whole fighting thing isn't quite as fun and as romantic as the movies make it out to be. It fucking hurts, right? So I think a lot of these people that want to fight, they haven't been hit enough, or they're truly sadistic. And I've known sadistic people, right? I knew them in the Marines. They're fucking mean bastards, and they're out there. As preppers, you have to ask yourself, am I a prepper? so that I can have the advantage and dominate and hurt people, or am I a prepper for good reasons? Right? We know who we are as people individually. I can't tell you who you are any more than you can tell who I am. Right? I just make claims about who I am and what I believe, and I think that my history and my life is for me to deal with and people around me understand. That said, back to the action here. They are, right? There's some just amazing footage and pictures of what's going on in Hong Kong. People, regular people are being hurt, protesters are being hurt, and then the law enforcement is being hurt. And why? Why is all this happening? Because of human frailty, weakness, ignorance, and greed. Corruption, in other words. Corrupt officials and people in power want more power and more corruption. And people are fighting back. They finally had enough. They're at the bottom. When things go bad, things get worse. Once again, I ask you as a prepper, as a human being, what is it that you want? Because when shit hits the fan, you can get it. What do you want? Do you want to be safe and protected, right? Have everything you need, food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, means of self-defense to live? Or do you want to go out and cause mayhem? Do you want to join the fray? It's really incredible what has happened. And people say, shit can't hit the fan, John. People aren't that bad. It's not like you say. Well, I've given many examples just over the last few days of both now historic and current or modern examples of how things can go bad very fast. Right? Things can go bad very fast. Whether it's fuel, whether it's over money, so fuel like the Australia issue in the 70s, or cash and money in Greece 5 years ago, whether it's students and protesting in Hong Kong, current, right? There's a number of ways things can go bad very, very, very quickly. And there's a question at the end of this article. A severe police crackdown is coming, right? Though it appears the Chinese military is, for now, still staying on the sidelines, right? It could escalate to where the Chinese military gets involved. I'm surprised it hasn't, to be frank. But there's another kind of idea that's brought up. It says, as the battle for the student-occupied campus rages on, we don't have to wonder for a moment what police in America would do if bows and arrows were launched at them. And I thought that's rather a Pollyannish or naive comment to make. I do wonder what would happen in America if we get to a shit it's the fan hotspots, say campuses around the country, were to start doing similar things. And would students on campuses have bows and arrows and Molotov cocktails and throw them at police? And what would American police do? What kind of escalation would we expect? And then you have to ask the question, well, if shit is hitting the fan like that, maybe not everywhere, but in locations, what can we expect from the police in response? Can we expect Waco-like sieges? Remember Waco, Texas? It wasn't just the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, federal agents going in there and shooting the shit out of civilians. They also had helicopter gunships circling and shooting civilians. Then I get to ask the question, what would other Americans do? If the students on campuses are a bunch of socialist fucks, will Americans come to their rescue? I don't know. Will abuses by government and government agents, will that go without retaliation from other students, other people? Will we say, hey, that's too much? Or would you say, hey, the little fuckers deserved it? Where would you be? And I know the answer is depends on the situation. Who started it? Who has a legitimate gripe? will a crackdown on others occur? And I'll point to Hurricane Katrina. It was a hurricane, wasn't a protest, wasn't a riot, wasn't lawlessness, but the government acted first and came in and said, we're collecting weapons. We are here to kick you out of your homes and take your fucking weapons. Is America going to allow that to happen again? Now with Katrina, it was a very small area and police came from as far as California to help collect weapons and violate people's rights. Watch the videos. The NRA actually put out a great video showing an elderly lady getting mauled by a CHP, California Highway Patrol, because she had a revolver that she said, this is what I use to protect myself if it happens to happen. Beaten up in her own home. Now I'm going to ask the question. If the government decides it wants to take control of America because an emergency has happened, we have shit-it's-the-fan hotspots, do you suspect the people are going to use Molotov cocktails, rocks, books, chairs, and maybe bows and arrows and makeshift javelins to defend themselves? Do you think for a second in a hot neighborhood or a hot city that there are enough police to do a damn thing about it? Even if they call in the National Guard, it's still a military unit that has tactics and strategies that are designed to focus on one point and one point only. And that, if you look at it, that is why it has been a failure in a guerrilla warfare, a terror war. You can't defeat the enemy because you engage them here, but they're over there, and they're over there, and they're over there, and they're over there, and they're over there. You can't get rid of them because they're not fighting the same war. Right? It's not an asymmetric attack. It is an everywhere attack. Think about that for a second. It's not a focused attack. It's everywhere and everything. If the police become abusive in a shit-it's-the-fan environment, like Hong Kong, if it's perceived they're abusive, even if the police believe they're doing their job and they're doing it for the right reasons, it's going to be perceived by abuse by the others. But in America, just like they ask here, we don't have to wonder for a moment what police in America would do. I do wonder. Police are not going to go to work that day if they're getting shot at. They drive down the street and they're getting the JFK treatment. From above, from below, from the gutters, from behind bushes. People are going to shoot the ever-loving shit out of police in America if the police become abusive. If the police start collecting guns, not in Katrina, New Orleans, but in the rest of America, people will shoot the police. I'm not saying people should. I'm not recommending anyone does. I'm saying I think it's going to happen. And I believe the police will shoot back. I believe they're going to wear body armor and helmets, and they're going to come out in their fortified vehicles, and people will throw Molotov cocktails and other fuel bombs at these MRAPs, military armored bomb-proof vehicles, now owned by our police departments and sheriff's departments nationwide. They can be defeated. They're not, even tanks aren't 100% safe. They themselves present problems for those within them, right? I'm not going to get into military tactics and how they support each other. Ground troops supported by air troops, supported by armor, supported by artillery, and now supported by drones as well. But the police aren't the military, and even if the military was brought to bear in a shit-it's-the-fan, all hell is broken loose environment, look at what the military couldn't do even in a, relative to the size of the United States, country like Afghanistan, which is very rural, right, has its cities, and Iraq as well. You can't defeat pissed off cells of people, whether you call them terrorists, because that's what you think of them, or patriots, which is what they think of themselves. This can get out of hand quick. We're seeing evidence of it in Hong Kong. And we see how people think in Hong Kong. Even though they're a different culture than the United States, they're still very westernized. They're very capitalist in mind. They're not a bunch of, radical commies. They're Hong Kong people. They were under British control. They like their free markets and their high standard of living. And this is what happens when it gets jacked up. And then they do become violent. Pretty creative. Javelins, bows and arrows. That's pretty creative. Police are now firing, rubber bullets as well as real bullets. In the United States, it's a much bigger country than Hong Kong or Afghanistan or Iraq. It's a much bigger theater. And the military, even if it were brought to bear, wouldn't stop everything. And if you kill someone's wife or children, you've got an enemy for life. Think about it. Think about if your husband or your wife or your children or your parents were killed by an abusive government. How much would you love that government? How much would you respect those agents? That's what I'm talking about. That is going to fuel the conflagration that develops once shit finally hits the fan. That is why you need food and water and shelter. That is why you need to be prepared with a plan. It's incredible. And the more the police, and it says likely a severe police crackdown is coming. The more they crack down, the more the resistance happens. This is a lesson we all should have learned after going into Afghanistan and Iraq. Yeah, you liberate some who are happy with the new conditions, but in doing so, you piss off the other half or more. And certainly all of them are suspicious and all of them are resentful of being occupied by a military presence, even if it's for their own good, right? Here in America, we've got our freedoms and our liberty. We can go outside and walk and do business and do things. But there is a massive resentment for government interference, taxation, and police power. We're thankful that there's law and order here, but it's certainly not being promoted by the government. The government promotes, once again, that iron fist concept of it'll pet you until it hits you. It's peaceful right now. You can hear the birds sing, right? Sunshine is going to come out here. Right? It's a beautiful day in the world. Why do we have shit hitting the fan? Because that's how it happens. That's what happens when corruption and decadence and immorality, lawlessness by our governments takes place. You could say, yeah, also these mega corporations and banks. Yeah, they're corrupt and rotten to the core also. And it comes at the expense of the people who ultimately, finally, at some point will say, we fucking had it. And Nero fiddled while Rome burned. You probably heard that saying. Very quickly, and I'll end on this. What is this thing, this kind of analogous concept of Nero fiddling while Rome burned? Well, to fiddle or to play a musical instrument is to relax, enjoy opulence and luxury, right? To enjoy oneself, basically, to enjoy oneself while Rome burned, right? In other words, the empire was collapsing. But those in power, like Nero the emperor, didn't give a fuck, didn't care, didn't even really understand what was going on. We have a more modern example of that, with Marie Antoinette saying, fuck it, let them eat cake. And that wasn't the delicious kind of cake. The cake she was referring to when she said, let them eat cake. Back in the old days when ovens were heated with wood stoves would build up on the inside, from things being baked and boiled off. They didn't have easy off oven cleaner. There would become a layer on the inside of ovens of stuck food particles and smoke particles and shit that's burnt. That was called cake, right? You'd have to chisel and scrape your stove out with a knife or a tool. That was cake. And she said, let him eat that. Fuck them, in other words. In other words, Marie Antoinette, all she cared about was her own shit. Fuck them. Let him eat cake, right? That's the attitude of government when it becomes ultimately abusive. when it doesn't serve the people. They're going to fiddle on, drink their wine, and say, fuck them. That's why we're preppers, is because they don't really give a shit. They only care about themselves. And so you have no other alternative than to plan for yourself, because we're no longer acting as communities and states and a culture and a nation. We've been subdivided and told that we don't matter. Right? And then a lot of us have been castigated and treated as evil subpartisan groups, like toxic, masculine, male, white people. Okay, then, if that's how you think of me, then, everyone's going to get what they deserve if they don't want to cooperate. But really, leadership comes from the top. That's taught in intelligent business practice. It's taught in the military. And it should be taught in colleges, that leadership comes from the top. That's leading. And if we have chaos in the streets, chaos in government, then there is no leadership. Ask yourself why, and you'll have all the answers you need. Get prepared. Chance favors the prepared mind is yours. Semper Fi to everyone. Godspeed, everyone.